Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, hazardous weather graphic, and we've got a lot of lit up areas here. Start down in the south. This is a flood watch out here on the Kenai Peninsula, actually specifically for Seward. It doesn't extend up into the northern areas here. It just happens to be in the zone, but it's for the Seward area, and that's for the heavy rain that's going to be moving on into the area there tonight and through tomorrow. And actually the watch is out for, let's see, it begins Sunday afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, and will continue into Monday evening. Possible flooding due to all the gravel is in the riverbed there, and of course that makes it easier to flood. Otherwise, winter weather advisory for the Susitna Valley, and that's out until 10 a.m. Sunday morning. Could see continued snow, especially it'll be quite varied and variable, the amounts. Heaviest, of course, higher elevations back in toward the mountains there to the west and to the north, but anywhere from 4 to 8 inches or so, give or take, could fall in that area in the next 12 hours or so. And then a high wind warning is out for the Alaska Range, and that's 6 p.m. this evening until 6 p.m. Sunday evening. Look for gusts anywhere from 50 to 70 miles an hour for the especially back here to the west, beginning during that time period and actually starting up at any time, and those higher gusts later tonight in through tomorrow. And then the winter storm warning out for the greater Galena area down in toward McGrath and Nikolai, and then out toward Grayling. That winter storm warning for 4 to 8 inches of snow. Some areas see higher amounts. Also, as a precipitation with warmer air coming in begins to change over to rain, could see some glaze ice to go along with that. Winter storm warning out also for the St. Lawrence Island area, Bering Strait coast, for similar conditions and strong winds. Winter weather advisories out here for the yellow shaded areas, and that's for conditions that aren't as bad as in the warning areas. So 4 to 8 inches of snow here, call it 2 to 5 in these other areas there, and that extends all the way up to the Arctic coast. Winter weather advisories just about covering the entire Fairbanks forecast office domain there, with the exception of the upper Tanana Valley and the 40-mile country. And moving to satellite imagery, you can see a huge mass of cloudiness here pulling northward with that was fairly strong low pressure trying to push northward. Actually, another center is redeveloping on the Aleutian side of on the north side of the Aleutian chain there, and another one hanging back to the south. But anyway, the frontal boundary right through here actually looks like a couple of frontal boundaries, one possibly right through here, and then more of a trough axis there. But results the same. Strong winds, heavy rains occurring here. Unalaska picked up 2.5 inches of rain in the last 24 hours from that system. About 2/3 of an inch fell at, let's see, it was St. George Island. And winds also increasing. In fact, 40, 50 mile an hour wind gusts here across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta today. Also the Seward Peninsula. Even Kotzebue seeing gusts 40 miles an hour this afternoon, with precipitation pushing eastward and northward. The Arctic coast, though, pretty nice up there, especially on the central and east side. Lighter winds and maybe even some clearing, but you can see a lot of thick cirrus spreading eastward here, even into the Copper River Basin, almost over toward the border. Southeast coast was dry for the most part. A couple of exceptions up here in the north, those isolated showers I mentioned yesterday, they actually did develop, and Hoonah picked about 1/100 of an inch of precipitation. And over in Glacier Bay, anywhere from 1 to 2/10 of an inch fell in those showers. Dry Bay had 1/100 of an inch, and that action's about over. Moisture will continue to increase tonight, along with the winds, which were gusting as high as, 61 miles an hour at both Cold Bay and Port Hayden today, ahead of that front. Cape Newnham at gusts 73 miles per hour. And Dillingham seeing gusts 40 miles an hour. And Sparrowvon, Western Alaska Range, 56 mile an hour wind gusts there. And that whole wind and rain pattern will be slowly shifting eastward tonight and tomorrow. On the chart, you can see the tight gradient in advance of the front here, bringing those wind speeds I just mentioned up along with a heavy precip here. Nome picking up about half an inch of precip in the last 24 hours, the 24-hour amounts, and that 2.5 inches on Alaska, that's a 24-hour amount as well, with other amounts ranging about half an inch, water equivalent, liquid water equivalent amounts at Bethel and Togiak. So real good, both a good rain and wind producer so far, living up to its what we expected it to be here as it pushes into the southwest interior. Dry to the north, mostly dry over the panhandle for tonight. Again, the winter storm warnings and advisories out. Snow trying to cross the Brooks Range there. Probably won't make it to the central eastern Arctic coast, but definitely elsewhere there. And then behind the warm front, good surge of warm air coming up behind that thing. And so getting mixed precipitation through here, moderate to heavy rain from the Kuskokwim Valley areas, actually maybe even a little farther north, back down to heavy rain on the upslope areas of the Aleutian Range, Kodiak Island, Western Alaska Range, and that's shifting into the Kenai Peninsula as well, but remaining dry eastern Copper River Basin. Loses shower activity up over the northern panhandle, just variably cloudy to mostly clear elsewhere with very light winds. Otherwise, back over the Aleutians, still some strong northerly winds on the backside of this as we develop two low centers here. This one's still hanging back along or just south of the Aleutians, but everything moving slightly to the east. And for tomorrow, it doesn't move that much to the east. This one kind of drifts farther north, but this does come back and just gets north of the Aleutians there, west-northwest of Nikolsky. And the frontal boundary pushes eastward a little bit and hardly at all up to the north, but a lot of precipitation with that. Warmer temperatures, rain, again, depends on your time of day and elevation, of course. Moderate to heavy amounts of rain there, supporting that flood watch out for Seward. And look at that gradient, very tight here across south central Alaska area, right up to the Alaska Range with a high wind warning out there for gusts anywhere from 50 to 70 miles an hour. Chance of rain really tapers off as you head in toward Yakutat, and just some very mostly cloudy skies of mid and higher type clouds from the northern panhandle, partly sunny down to the south. And for Monday, not much change. This front weakens considerably as it tries to push eastward. It does get past Cook Inlet, so still some moderate amounts of rain here in the North Gulf Coast and southern Kenai Peninsula areas, but not like it will be over the next 24 hours. And a chance of rain re-arrives on the north coast of the Panhandle in the late afternoon. That'd be light rain, otherwise partly sunny down there. Mixed precipitation up here, Brooks Range out to the northwest coast, even the western Arctic coast. Temperatures rising above freezing, in fact pushing 40 on the Arctic coast in areas there Monday afternoon. And wet and breezy out over the central and eastern Aleutians and Bering Sea. Lows tonight, single numbers and teens up north, mid-40s down south, followed by highs in the upper 50s for Bristol Bay tomorrow. And then the lows following morning, mostly in the 30s to 40s, mild even out to the Arctic coast. And that's all I've got time for this segment.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First flying weather graphic for tomorrow morning. We've got a lot of IFR here, Bering Sea, spreading on into the northern interior here, right up into the Brooks Range, and then north of the mountains, VFR mostly, all the way out to the Arctic coast. IFR here along the southwest coast and up across Togiak Bay to near Dillingham, then marginal VFR, eastern Bristol Bay, and then back to IFR here, south side of the Alaska Peninsula, up into mostly Kodiak Island, and then kind of a mixture of VFR and marginal conditions here from the Kuskokwim Valley to the Copper River Basin and southeast coast. Some IFR in the north to start with, VFR central areas, and then marginal down toward Dixon Entrance. Sunday afternoon, VFR here, the entire southeast coast, right on up Yakutat into the eastern interior, eastern Copper River Basin, up into the 40-mile country, mid and upper Tanana Valley. IFR there, say from Passage Canal on down the south side of the Kenai Peninsula, and then back up and along the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, Kodiak IFR, Unmak Island IFR, tending to improve for Adak, but a big swath of IFR here, central eastern bearing right up into the western interior. And for Monday morning, still a lot of IFR here, especially up toward the Brooks Range and from roughly the Kuskokwim Valley or so, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, mostly IFR. Arctic coast, central and east side, IFR, north slope marginal. Marginal VFR, Susitna Valley, and here about the mid-Tanana Valley. From there eastward, VFR for the Panhandle. And for the afternoon on Monday, we've got VFR here for the southeast coast, VFR north of the Alaska Range there, across the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, up there across the Yukon, and just about up to the Porcupine. Then you pick up the marginal conditions, IFR along and south of the Brooks Range, again right on out, Selawik Valley, Kotzebue, northwest coast to Cape Lisburne. Point Lay may go VFR in the afternoon, but the central eastern Arctic coast stays IFR. Southern Bering Sea, mostly marginal, and it looks like a swath of improving conditions out there to the west, followed by a little bit more marginal VFR. And for the passes tomorrow, both Anatuvik and Atigan, mostly IFR throughout the entire day. Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR for those two passes, lowest conditions on the eastern entrance of both passes. And for Rainy, IFR, lowest conditions eastern entrance, could be VFR out the west side there though into the Kuskokwim Valley. And for Windy, occasionally marginal, lowest conditions southern entrance, better off to the north. And Isabel, look for marginal VFR most of the day tomorrow. And Mentasta probably won't be as bad as Isabel, but marginal VFR, I'd say that would be mostly on the southern entrance, otherwise VFR going on out to the north. And Tanita, marginal VFR. Portage, IFR. Chilkoot and White, I think it'll be another VFR flying day for both of those passes. Freezing levels here, upper level ridge, and then the southerly flow ahead of that storm, that's slow moving system. A lot of warm air coming up with those two features, 10,000 feet there, right along Kodiak, almost to the Kenai Peninsula, 8,000 feet right up over the western interior. And taking a look at icing, we've got that frontal boundary shifting eastward as forecasted, and areas of considerable moderate rime icing along in advance of that here, Kodiak up into the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and along the Alaska Range, and then come spotty areas back out to the west. Otherwise, the lighter shaded area here, just isolated areas of moderate or light to moderate rime icing above 3,000 feet here over the Chukchi Sea, and then with the warm air aloft, say above 9 or even 10,000 feet there around the Kodiak Island area. Jet stream, here's the upper level ridge associated with those high freezing levels and the southerly flow pulling the warm air northward. Kind of a sharp trough out here. This low trying to track northward, another one develops south of the Alaska Peninsula. Northerly winds here, 110 knots, and then the northerlies here east of the Panhandle now. And for 9,000 feet, we're looking at 50 to 60 knot winds, this whole wind band shifting eastward here from what it is today into, Kenai Peninsula and northeast Bristol Bay up into the western Alaska Range area. And about the same thing going on at 3,000 feet. Turbulence-wise, occasional moderate chop here in the orange shaded area, western interior, right up into Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak, and the western Aleutians.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at the coastal water forecast, we got west-northwest breezes, 10 to 15 knots on the south coast of the Panhandle. Up north, southeast, 10 to 15 knots also, same speeds, but different direction. And light northwest breeze, barely a breeze, not even a breeze, 5 knots out of the northwest for the central northern inside waters and 10 knots for Clarence Strait. Outlook for Monday, southeast 10 for Clarence Strait, and I call that a breeze, south 15 for the central northern inside waters, seas 3 feet. Kind of a variable to west wind here on the south coast at 10 knots, becoming south 20 knots, north coast, southeast 25, even farther to the north. And for Prince William Sound tomorrow, northeast winds coming up to 25 knots, seas building to 6 feet there. Southeast 30 for the eastern North Gulf Coast, and then gales pick up here in the western coastal areas there south of the Kenai Peninsula, seas building to 21 feet and 45-knot gales there for the Barren Islands, and a storm warning out for Kamishak Bay, east winds 50, seas 16 feet. Gale warnings out for southern Cook Inlet, northeast 35, north of the Forelands, northeast at 30. And then those fall back to about 20 knots from the east here for northern Cook Inlet, southerlies at 25, 5-foot seas, southern Cook Inlet. Southeast at 30 here for Kamishak Bay, southerly winds 25 knots for the Barren Islands and the western North Gulf Coast, and gale warnings southeast 35 for the eastern North Gulf Coast, east 35 knots. Gale warnings also out in Prince William Sound, those seas almost 10 feet. And for Kodiak Island, southeast 45 knots tomorrow with 24-foot seas, Shelikof Strait east at 30. And Sitkinak to Castle Cape, we've got southeast winds here, 45 knots. Jumping the mountains, they're about 40 knots out of the southeast for a full gale there in Bristol Bay. Alaska Peninsula, southerlies, 30 knots, seas 6 to 18 feet. And for Monday, south 25 for Kodiak Island and Bristol Bay, as well as Sitkinak to Castle Cape. All those areas, south winds 25 knots. And south 30 for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula here. Pacific side southwest at 30 with 16-foot seas. Fox Islands tomorrow, south to southeast 30 knots. For Unalaska Island, Unimak Island, west northwest 15 to 20 knots. And Central Aleutians, northwest 30 to 35 knots there, so kind of bordering on the gale side. Well, the gale's in these zones south of the islands. And then gale warnings all the way out to Shimian at 2, 35 to 40 knots. And then for Monday, falling back down to 20 knots here for the western Aleutians, west 30 knots, say from Kiska Island eastward across Adak and Atka, and that continues eastward across Nikolsky and Unimak Island, turning southwest at 30 knots with 14 to 15 foot seas for Unalaska Island. Southwest coast, winds southeast, north of Nunivak Island, 25 knots. Along the Kuskokwim Delta coast, 30 knots. 25 knot winds also out for St. Lawrence Island from the southeast, only 15 knots for the Pribilofs, and gale warnings for both Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island, 35 knots out of the east. Outlook for Monday, lighter winds there in Norton Sound, considerably lighter, east at 20, 25 knot winds St. Lawrence Island, right down to Nunivak Island along the Yukon Delta coast. South of the island there, south winds at 30 knots, north 30 knots for St. Matthew Island, southwest 15 for the Pribilofs. And for the central eastern Beaufort Sea coast, small craft advisories, winds all easterly and 25 knot winds easterly with 6 foot seas. And then we pick up the gales there on the western Arctic coast and all the way down and around to Cape Thompson, 35 knot winds there, and then east 30 from Cape Thompson to Wales. Outlook for Monday, southeast 30 knots, Wales to Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, south 30, holding on to easterly direction and a little higher than what we'll see tomorrow on Monday up here for the Arctic coast. 30 knot winds, except the eastern zones there. Gale warnings are out for 35 knot winds and 5 to 10 foot seas. Outlook for tonight, huge area of moisture with this rather potent front here as it pushes slowly east. You can see the pressure gradient tightening up south central Alaska, moderate to heavy amounts of rain associated with it, winter storm advisories and warnings out associated with this, high wind warning for the Alaska Range, flood watch for the Seward area. And for tomorrow, wind, rain, moderate to heavy at times here, Kodiak Island up across south central Alaska, the Alaska Range. Warmer air changing that snowfall over to rain and rising the freezing levels even out to the Arctic coast, where they'll be near 40 Monday afternoon.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.